wind swept across the dry plains of West Texas, stirring up a storm of dust and brittle weeds. It had been a cruel summer, dry as bone, with no rain in months. Ranchers prayed, their livestock thinned, and folks packed up and left, one wagon at a time, trying to outrun the dust and despair, but not Luke Halter. Luke was a quiet cowboy, 33, and already worn thin by life. He wasn't a talker, didn't have much family left. Just his dog, Boone, an old blue heeler who'd been with him through 3 failed cattle drives, a barn fire, and the death of his mother. Luke lived on the edge of a dying town called Rustwood, where the church pews stayed empty, and the saloon was always full. Folks there didn't have much faith left, in God or in each other. Luke didn't drink, didn't gamble, and didn't chase women. Not because he was some kind of saint. He just didn't have the time or the money for trouble. His ranch, what little was left of it, barely paid the bills. Most days he worked from dawn to dusk, keeping his last dozen head of cattle alive. Nights he sat under the stars, listening to Boone breathe slow and steady beside him. One blistering afternoon, the kind where the heat presses down on you like a curse, Boone started barking out by the fence line. Luke wiped the sweat from his brow and stepped outside, shotgun slung just in case it was a rattler or a coyote sniffing around. But Boone wasn't barking at an animal. He was circling something in the dust, something lying face down near the cattle trail. Luke ran over, heart thudding. He rolled the figure over gently. It was a woman, young, skin scorched red from the sun, lips cracked, dress torn at the hem and filthy. Her hands were shaking like leaves in a storm, and her breathing was shallow, barely there. "Boone," Luke whispered. "Get the water, go, boy." The dog took off toward the cabin. Luke lifted the woman as gently as he could and carried her inside. She weighed almost nothing, a ghost with bones. He laid her on his mama's old bed, poured water on a rag, and pressed it to her lips. She flinched, tried to speak, then fainted again. He worked through the night cooling her, dripping water between her lips, whispering comfort he hadn't spoken to anyone in years. He didn't sleep. He just kept watch, afraid she'd die if he so much as blinked. It wasn't until the next morning, when the sun rose low and mean again, that she finally stirred and opened her eyes. They were green. Not the kind of green you'd see in leaves or grass, not out here where everything was dead. They were emerald, tired but sharp, like they still had some fight in them. She tried to speak, but her voice came out dry as sand. Luke helped her. "Sip water." "Name?" he asked gently. She blinked. "Callie." "Callie what?" She shook her head, slow and heavy. Don't know. Can't remember." Luke frowned. "You hurt anywhere?" "Just my pride," she whispered. A faint smile ghosted her lips, and Luke felt something shift in him, something he hadn't felt in years. Callie didn't remember much. Said she'd been walking for days. Said she'd been running from a man who promised love and gave her hell. Luke didn't ask for more, didn't push. Everyone had ghosts. He let her stay, for days, then weeks. She slept in his mama's bed, helped with chores once she regained her strength. Cooked better than he could, laughed louder than he expected, and sang sometimes when she thought he wasn't listening. The house began to feel less like a grave, and more like something halfway alive again. But Rustwood wasn't the kind of town that let things be. Word got around fast, about the woman staying at Luke's, about how she was young, pretty, and clearly trouble. Women clucked their tongues, men leered. Luke ignored them. He didn't owe this town anything. He owed Callie his silence, his shelter, and perhaps, if she wanted, his protection. Still, he wondered who she really was, where she came from, why no one was looking for her. Then one day, while fixing a fence post near the northern boundary, Boone found something. A bag, torn, half buried in the dirt, Inside, a few crumpled papers, a broken necklace, and a letter, damp, smudged, but still readable. Luke sat on the ground and opened it. His hands shook as he read the words. To Callista Grace Whitmore, if anything happens before our wedding, know that I loved you with everything I had. I'll come for you. L.H. Luke's heart stopped. Those initials, L.H., his own. He read the letter again. It was his handwriting, but he didn't remember ever writing it. Luke sat in the dirt for a long time, the wind scraping across his skin like old regret. He turned the letter over, reading and rereading it, trying to find an answer that didn't exist. The handwriting was his. The words were his voice, clear as day. But the memory? Nothing. Just blank silence. How could he have written something so personal, so desperate, and not remember it? When he finally walked back to the cabin, Callie was on the porch shelling beans, her hair tied up in a red scarf, her face calm like she belonged there, like she had always belonged there. She looked up and smiled, and Luke's heart ached with something he couldn't name. He didn't tell her about the letter. Not yet. Instead, he tucked it into the inside pocket of his coat and carried on like nothing had changed, but everything had. Callie kept growing stronger. She started tending the garden, feeding the chickens, patching up Luke's worn shirts with neat little stitches. She even stitched Boone a new collar from old leather scraps. Sometimes at night, Luke caught her staring out the window, as if she was trying to remember something just beyond reach. And sometimes she cried, silently, not loud or dramatic, just slow tears she wiped away before anyone could notice. But Luke noticed. One evening, as the sun fell in crimson ribbons over the plains, she asked him quietly, "You ever believe in promises that outlive memory?" He looked up from his work. "I used to believe a lot of things, not sure what's left." She nodded like she understood. "Feels like I'm supposed to be somewhere, with someone, like I made a promise. And now I'm lost, trying to keep it." Luke didn't answer. He couldn't. Not with the letter burning in his pocket. A few days later, trouble arrived. 3 men on horseback, slick-haired, sharp-jawed, and snake-eyed, rolled into Rustwood, asking about a woman. Said her name was Callista. Said she ran off with something that didn't belong to her. Word traveled fast. By sundown, Luke knew. He found Callie out by the old well, filling buckets. "You need to tell me the truth," he said. Her hands froze on the rope. "There's men looking for you. Say you stole something." Her face didn't change, but her eyes went wide, the kind of wide that only comes from real fear. "I didn't steal anything," she said. "I ran, that's all." "From who?" "From a man who bought me." Luke's stomach dropped. "I was meant to marry him," she said, voice tight. "My stepfather arranged it. I said no. I tried to run once, they locked me in the cellar. Second time, I made it farther. I got to a church. A preacher said he'd marry me to a man who'd keep me safe. Said someone had written ahead, promised to meet me there." Luke's breath caught. "I waited 2 days at that church. No one came. The preacher disappeared. I ran again. I've been running ever since." Luke stepped back, pulse pounding. "When was that?" 3 months ago, outside Abilene. That's when it hit him. The fire. 3 months ago, Luke had been on his way east. A preacher had written about a woman who needed protection, a woman promised in marriage to a man who would never hurt her. Luke had agreed, written back, started the ride. But halfway there, lightning struck. His barn caught fire. He lost 1/3 of his herd. By the time he got back on the road, the preacher had vanished. He'd assumed it was a scam. Another letter, in a long list of bad luck. He never imagined the woman was real. Never imagined she'd keep walking, keep running, until she collapsed near his fence. Boone hadn't found a stranger. He'd found the woman Luke had promised to marry. That night, the three men came riding up Luke's trail. He didn't invite them in. "Evening, boys," he said, standing calm with Boone at his side. "We're looking for a girl," one said, real polite. "Goes by Callista, belongs to a man in Amarillo. He's offering good money for her return." "She ain't livestock," Luke replied. The man's smile dropped. "You harboring her?" "She's under my roof." "Then you best hand her over, Cowboy." Luke looked at Boone. "You hear that, boy?" Boone growled low, lips curled. "I got no quarrel," Luke said, voice steady. "But if she wants to stay, she stays. You want her, you try taking her. Just know, you won't walk away the same." The men didn't smile again. They left in the dark. Callie wanted to run again. She started packing the next morning, hands shaking. "You think I'll let you go now?" Luke asked, standing in the doorway. "They'll come back," she whispered. "And next time with more men. Then let them." "You don't understand." "I do." He pulled the letter from his pocket and handed it to her. She read it. Twice. Then looked up, her hands trembling. "You wrote this," she said. "I did. I just didn't remember. Not until you came. Then, we were supposed to—" He nodded. "We were, but life got in the way. I didn't forget you. Just didn't know it was you." She sat down, slow. "All this time, I thought I was chasing a dream. Turns out I was walking toward a promise. You walked straight into it." Silence stretched between them. The wind kicked up dust outside. Boone lay quiet, eyes half-lidded but alert. Finally, Callie stood. "Then I'm not running anymore." Luke smiled, and it wasn't the tight, guarded smile he'd worn for years. It was soft, real. "Good," he said, "'cause this time, I'm not letting go." The day after Callie decided to stay, Luke began boarding up the windows. Not out of fear, out of preparation. He knew the kind of men they were dealing with. Hired guns didn't leave things unfinished. They'd be back. And next time, they wouldn't ride up smiling. Callie helped where she could, though her hands shook when she hammered nails. Boone trailed her everywhere, sensing the tension in the air. The ranch, usually quiet in its emptiness, now felt like a drawn bowstring, waiting to snap. That night, Luke and Callie sat on the porch under a full moon, the stars scattered across the sky like they had something to prove. Callie wore one of Luke's old coats, oversized on her, the sleeves rolled back. She was quiet for a long while before she finally spoke. "I never believed in fate," she said. "Always thought the world just happened, good or bad. No rhyme or reason." Luke stared out at the plains. "Me too. But then I think about how far I walked, how close I came to dying, how your dog found me, how you wrote that letter." She turned toward him. "How do you explain all that?" Luke didn't answer right away. He thought about all the times he had asked God for a break, just a little mercy. He remembered the barn fire, the lost cattle, the empty mailbox, the lonely nights. He never expected the answer to come crawling out of the dust, half dead and silent. "Maybe," he said finally. "We were both too stubborn to quit." 2 days passed. Then just after dawn on the 3rd, Boone's barking broke the stillness. Luke stepped out with his rifle. He didn't need to squint. 6 riders, not 3. 6. They stopped at the edge of the property. The same man as before tipped his hat, a mean grin stretching across his face. "Real generous of you to give us time to gather reinforcements," he called out. Luke didn't answer. "I'm not here to argue," the man continued. "I'm here to collect. You've got something that don't belong to you." "She's not a thing," Luke said, "and she's not yours. She was promised. Not to you. The man's expression soured. "We'll burn this place to the ground if we have to." Luke raised his rifle. "Then you'd better bring water." Tide they came at sundown. Luke had prepared every inch of the property, barrels of water, trenches filled with broken glass, and lines of sight marked for shooting. But 6 armed men were 6 armed men, and Luke was just one. The first gunshot cracked the silence like a bone. Luke fired back, picked off one rider who thought he could circle behind. Boone lunged from the shadows, tearing into another's leg, forcing him off his horse. The others returned fire, bullets slamming into the walls of the cabin like hammers on wood. Callie stayed inside, crouched low with a pistol Luke had given her. She wasn't shaking anymore. Outside, the fight raged. Boone got grazed, yelped once, then limped but kept moving. Luke was clipped on the shoulder. Still, he stood his ground. For every man who tried to advance, Luke made them pay. Dust clouded everything, choking, blinding. The sun sank into a bloody red haze. When the final shot rang out, silence fell. 3 men lay groaning in the dirt. 1 was dead. 2 had ridden off, bleeding and beaten. Luke stood panting, blood staining. His shirt. Boone leaned against his leg, exhausted but alive. Callie ran out from the house, eyes wide with horror, but also awe. She ran to him, threw her arms around him, and they stayed like that for a long moment, breathing hard, shaking together. Sheriff. Tobin came later that night, tipped off by someone in town. He found Luke sitting on the porch, Boone asleep at his feet, Callie tending his wound by lantern light. "You all right, Halter?" Luke looked up, weariness in his bones. "Been better." Sheriff looked at the injured men tied up by the barn. "Self-defense?" Luke nodded. Sheriff spat in the dirt. "Good. Saves me paperwork." He tipped his hat to Callie. "Ma'am." She nodded quietly. "Thank you, Sheriff." As the lawman rode off, Luke exhaled slowly. The danger was over. For now. The next weeks passed quietly. Luke's shoulder healed. Boone's limp faded. But something else grew stronger. Love. Not the kind from stories or songs. The real kind. Quiet, earned, built in the ashes of fear and fire. Callie laughed more now. She hummed when she cooked, danced barefoot in the kitchen when she thought no one was looking. Luke caught himself smiling at her in ways he hadn't smiled at anything in years. One morning, as the sun broke over the dry hills, she handed him a small wrapped bundle. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it." Inside was the old letter, but cleaned, pressed flat, and carefully framed in a piece of polished cedar wood. "I thought maybe," she said, eyes shining, "you'd want to keep the promise you made." Luke stared at the letter, then at her. "I never stopped wanting to." She stepped forward. "Then ask me." He didn't kneel, didn't make a speech. He just took her hands, looked her in the eyes, and said, "Callista Grace Whitmore, will you marry me?" Tears slipped down her cheeks as she nodded. "I thought you'd never ask." The wedding was small. Just them, the sheriff, and a few good neighbors. No fancy dress, no grand cake, just Boone in a ribbon and 2 people who'd been through hell and back finding heaven in each other. Afterward, they danced under the stars. No music, just the sound of a breeze and a promise fulfilled. The cow. Morning after their wedding, Luke woke before dawn to the sound of Boone's tail thumping softly against the cabin floor. Callie was still asleep beside him, her hand tucked under her cheek, the faintest smile lingering on her lips. For a moment he didn't move, didn't even breathe too loud, afraid that if he blinked, all of it would disappear. But it didn't. She was real. They were married. And for the first time in years, Luke Halter wasn't alone. Married life didn't change Luke and Callie overnight. They still had fences to mend, cattle to feed, and bills to dodge. The drought hadn't lifted, and the sky still offered no mercy. But something was different now, not in the world around them, but in the way they moved through it. Luke found himself watching Callie when she wasn't looking, humming as she swept the porch, brushing dust from the windows with care, reading old books by lantern light at night. There was grace in the way she worked, not flashy, not loud, just steady, like water wearing down stone. And Callie, she bloomed. She wore her hair down more often, her laugh grew bolder, and she stopped flinching at loud noises. The hard lines around her eyes began to soften. The fear that used to sit on her shoulders like a shadow had slowly begun to lift. Still, the town of Rustwood didn't forget easy. There were whispers, curious looks in church, folks wondering how a runaway woman and a loner rancher had suddenly become man and wife. Some said she'd bewitched him. Others said he was too desperate to know better. Luke heard it all, but said nothing. Callie did once. "Does it bother you?" she asked him, as they fixed a broken wheelbarrow together one morning. "What?" "That people talk." Luke looked at her, quiet for a moment. Then, "They talked when I was alone, too. At least now they're talking and I'm happy." That made her smile. Spring came slow that year, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. The ground stayed stubborn, and the sky stingy. But then, one April morning, clouds rolled in thick and low. Thunder cracked like God himself was angry, or maybe finally listening. The rain came hard and fast, and didn't stop for 2 days. Luke and Callie stood out in it, arms wrapped around each other, soaked and laughing. Boone barked and ran, circles around them like a pup again. The land drank deep, so did hope. Cattle grew stronger, grass came back green, and for the first time in years, Luke's books showed black instead of red. They weren't rich, but they weren't losing anymore. They were winning. Telekar. One evening, Callie came back from the general store with a letter in her hand. She didn't say much, just passed it to Luke with a look that said, "This might change things." It was from a lawyer in Amarillo. Her stepfather had died. No next of kin, no heirs. And in a final twist of irony, the land he'd once promised as dowry now legally belonged to her. 300 acres. Callie stared at the deed in silence. Luke waited, not pushing. Finally, she said, "I don't want it for revenge. I want it for the women he kept small. I want it to mean something." Luke nodded slowly. "Then let's make it mean something." By fall, they had a plan. The Iwa sold half the Amarillo land to fund a school, not just for children, but for women like Callie, runaways, widows, girls raised on fear and silence, the kind of place where a woman could learn to read, ride, farm, and start over. They called it Grace Hollow. Folks called it foolish at first, a rancher's wife trying to play preacher. But it worked, and little by little, Rustwood changed. Women came, some with children, some alone. And Callie met everyone with a firm handshake and soft eyes that said, "I know. I've been where you are." Luke built the buildings with his own hands. Boone kept watch at the gates. And the ranch, their home, grew louder with laughter and life. One morning, a young girl who'd just arrived asked Callie, "How'd you end up here? In the middle of nowhere with a cowboy?" Callie looked out over the dusty hills, where the wind moved slow and the sky hung wide and open. "His dog found me in the dust," she said, "and the rest was a promise." The wind had changed. Luke felt it in his bones as he rode the boundary fence that fall. The land was healing, the cattle were strong, and for the first time in years, his boots didn't feel like they were carrying failure with every step. But it wasn't just the ranch. It was Callie. She had settled into her life beside him like she'd been born for it. Not as a woman saved, but as one risen from ashes to build something lasting. She wasn't just a wife. She was a partner, And Grace Hollow, the land they'd turned into a haven for women like her, was proof of what they could create when they stood side by side. But peace, as Luke knew all too well, never stayed long in the West. It was early evening when the letter came. Callie read it first, standing near the back porch with a pot of stew still simmering inside. She didn't speak, just walked out to where Luke was shoeing a mare and held the envelope in her hand. He wiped the sweat from his brow and took it. "Another lawyer?" he asked. "No," she said quietly. "A name I haven't heard in years." The envelope was simple. No return address. Just a stamp from a small town 2 days west of Amarillo. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. No signature. No heading. "The man who tried to buy you isn't dead. He's looking again. This time, he has lawmen in his pocket. He wants you back, and he's got the papers to claim you, forged or not. Be careful." Luke looked up slowly. "You told me your stepfather passed." "He did," Callie said. "But he wasn't the one I ran from. He arranged the marriage, yes. But the man who wanted me, the one I fled from, his name was Vernon Hasker. Railroad money. Connections in high places. I thought he gave up years ago." Luke folded the letter in silence. "We should run," Callie said, but her voice betrayed her own doubt. "Pack what we can, go north, disappear." "No," Luke said firmly. "We've run enough." They prepared quietly, but thoroughly. Luke met with Sheriff Tobin that same night. The sheriff, a man with tired eyes and a spine hardened by years of surviving small-town politics, didn't like what he heard, but he believed it. "If Hasker's coming," he said, "he won't ride in with 6 men like last time. He'll come with warrants, judges, and men who wear badges bought with silver." "Then I need you to stall them," Luke said. Tobin nodded slowly. "You'll get time. That's all I can promise." Back at the ranch, Callie gathered documents. The deed to her stepfather's land, the old marriage contract, Luke's signed letter, everything they could use to prove she wasn't property to be claimed. "I won't go back," she told him that night, sitting on the edge of their bed. "If they take me, I'll fight, and if fighting ain't enough—" Luke knelt before her, taking her hands. "You're not alone this time." Boone, now older and moving a little slower, sat watchfully by the door, like he knew the old ghosts were stirring again. 3 days later, they came. Not in the dark of night like outlaws, but in daylight, with badges and documents, dressed in authority and arrogance, 6 men on horses, 1 carriage with black windows, and in the back of it, a man in a gray suit and white gloves, Vernon Hasker. Luke stood on the porch with Callie behind him. Boone lay at their feet. Sheriff Tobin rode up fast from town, dust clouding his coat, and pulled up beside Luke. 1. Of the suited men dismounted and unfolded a paper. "This woman," he said, nodding to Callie, "was entered into a legal arrangement with Mr. Hasker. We have evidence. Her whereabouts have been unlawfully concealed by Mr. Halter." Luke didn't flinch. "She's my wife." "Fraudulent marriage," the man snapped. "You signed a letter to a preacher who went missing. No witnesses, no license. That marriage is invalid, and Mr. Hasker has legal right." Sheriff Tobin cut in. "That preacher's body was found 3 weeks ago, murdered. Your man here was named in a letter found with the body. I'd be careful what ground you claim is legal." That stopped them cold. Hasker stepped from the carriage then. Tall, silver-haired, and smug. "Do you know what I paid for her?" he said. "Do you know how far she's stolen from me? I offered her a life. She gave me humiliation." Callie stepped forward then, calm, steady. "You didn't offer me life," she said. "You offered a prison, one I didn't choose." "You were bought," Hasker growled. "And bought things don't get to run." Luke's hand went to the butt of his revolver, slow and measured. Sheriff Tobin raised his voice. "You make one more move toward her, Hasker, and I'll bury you in court or the dirt, whichever you prefer." The tension hung so thick, even the horses stopped shifting. Then, something changed. From over the ridge, 10 riders appeared, women on horseback, women from Grace Hollow. They rode in silence, rifles slung across their backs, dust trailing like banners behind them. They didn't say a word. They just lined up behind Luke and Callie, forming a wall of strength. Some were young, some carried children, some bore scars that had never healed, but all had fire in their eyes. Fire Hasker recognized and feared. He looked around. Saw the sheriff's hand near his pistol. Saw the women. Saw Boone rise with a low growl. Saw Callie, not broken but blazing with the will to live, and he knew he'd lost. "This isn't over," he spat. "No," Luke said quietly. "It is." Hasker turned and walked back to the carriage. He didn't look back. That night, the women stayed for supper. The long table stretched out into the yard, laughter and light spilling from the lanterns. Boone lay near the fire, tail thumping slowly. Luke watched Callie smile, truly smile for the first time in days. "You all right?" he asked her. She nodded, taking his hand. I finally believe I'm free." Luke looked at her, the dust on her boots, the strength in her grip, the future in her eyes. "You were always free," he said. "You just needed someone to remind you." The seasons rolled forward like old wagons, creaking, steady, and relentless. 2 years passed. The grasslands around Rustwood turned green and golden with each spring and summer. Grace Hollow flourished, no longer just a sanctuary but a full community, home to over 30 women and children. What started as one woman's need to escape had become something so much more. A movement, a mission, a kind of quiet revolution built from the dust up. Callie became the heart of it. Not a teacher in a schoolhouse, not a preacher in a pulpit, but a guide. She helped every woman remember that their name, their voice, their hands were still their own. That love didn't come through fear. That being broken once didn't mean you stayed that way. Luke? Luke kept the land alive. He fixed fences, delivered calves, patched roofs, and sometimes just sat on the porch with Boone, watching the world they'd built take root. He never stood in Callie's way. He just stood beside her. That was his greatest gift. Boone slowed. Down. His eyes faded some. His legs stiffened. But he still tried to follow Luke down to the barn each morning, still curled up by the hearth each night. One evening, as the wind whispered through the cottonwoods and the lanterns in the bunkhouse began to flicker out one by one, Boone lay down on the porch and didn't get back up. Luke found him at sunrise, stretched out under the old rocking chair, his head resting like he'd just dozed off, peaceful and still. Callie came out silently and sank down beside him, her hand on Luke's shoulder. Neither of them spoke. They buried Boone on the hill, above the ranch, where the view stretched wide and wild, the place he had first found Callie in the dust. Luke carved a wooden marker. He found what others missed. He stayed when others ran. They placed a simple collar beneath the soil, cracked leather, worn from years of loyalty. Grief hung heavy after that. Boone had been more than a dog. He had been the beginning, the bridge between two broken hearts that didn't know. They still had life left in them. But life doesn't stop for pain. Not out here. And so they pressed on. One winter night, as snow gently fell and the stove glowed orange in the center of their cabin, Callie came to Luke with a trembling, hand and tear-filled eyes. "I think I'm carrying," she whispered. Luke stared for a long second. heart pounding like hooves on hard earth. Then his arms wrapped around her tight, and his voice cracked as he said, "You are?" She nodded against his chest. "I didn't think I could anymore." "You can," he whispered. "You are." The months that followed were the hardest and the holiest. Callie grew slower, softer. Luke worked harder, but smiled more. The women at Grace Hollow surrounded her like sisters, watching over her, caring for her. The child was born on a rainy morning in late September, a boy, full-lunged and red-faced, with hair the color of burnt wheat and eyes as fierce as his mother's. They named him Boone. And when Luke held that boy for the first time, he whispered through tears, "You were promised to us before we even knew we needed you." Years later, long after the cattle herds had doubled and Grace Hollow was known throughout 3 counties, folks would speak of Luke Halter and Callie like they were legends, but they weren't. They were just 2 people who met in the ruins of what others tried to break, and built something no fire or fury could undo. Every spring, on the anniversary of Boone's passing, Luke and Callie and their son would walk up that hill with 3 stones in their hands, one for the past, one for the promise, and one for the path still ahead. They'd sit by that grave, where an old dog once laid down to rest, and they'd whisper thanks, not for the land, not for the home, not for the reward that came later, but for the moment a cowboy's dog found a woman dying in the dust and led her home.